Greetings from EPG Pathshala. In this module, I am going to cover the privacy concepts. First, we will be checking what all terms are associated with privacy. Then we will check what are the problems, privacy problems, those are associated with computer. And then we will check what are the policies are defined to preserve the privacy. We will check about the laws, those are defined, and lastly we will check what is anonymity. First, I would start with the concept aspects of information privacy. So information privacy has three aspects. First is sensitive data, affected parties, and controlled disclosure. Actually, what does the term privacy suggest? It suggests that privacy is the right to control who knows certain aspects about one's communication and one's activities. Meaning that if somebody's communication and somebody's activities are to be known, then one should have a right to control. Now, once you give your number to someone else, your control is diminished because it depends in part on what someone else does with your number. Meaning that you are giving a telephone number to somebody. Now you never know that that fellow will give that number to somebody else. The second is sensitive data. Sensitive data says what is your height? Then you answer that my height is 5 feet. Or somebody may answer that I am a very private person and would not like to give you the detail. So what data to share and what data becomes sensitive, it depends on the person who is talking. So there are certain things that the data which some people think that it is a private. Saying that identity, the ownership of private data, the ability to control its disclosure, finances, credit and bank details, legal matters, medical conditions, drug use, DNA, genetic predispositions to illness, voting opinions, membership in advocacy organizations. There are certain preferences of religion, their biometric physical characteristic, polygraph results, fingerprints. Sometimes some people are writing their daily diaries where they mention what all activities are being performed by them on a daily basis, and they would not like to share this diary. Then there are school records, employee rating those kind of performance that some people may think it is a private. There are certain activities such as reading habits, web browsing, music, art and videos. There are air travel data, general travel data, a person's location. There are certain communications that has taken place, email, telephone calls and spam. So we have seen the list of the whole thing, that the data which people may consider private. The next is affected subjects. Affected subjects means the subject may be affecting to individual, group, companies, organization and governments. Those have data that which they may consider to be sensitive. For example, in a organization, saying that if it is a university, there is a record of students. Now, who all are the toppers and what did they score? It may not be considered as a private information, but the student's name, his address, telephone number, those are considered to be private information, so that the outsiders for any other purpose should not be able to contact the students. For organizations such as companies, privacy is usually related to gaining and maintaining an edge over competition. In companies, usually which employee is working on which project is not revealed, considered to be a private information. All in all, privacy is an aspect of confidentiality. We already have emphasized that security goals are confidentiality, integrity, availability. Confidentiality may frequently conflicts with availability, because if a matter is confidential, it may not be available. So if the telephone number need not be published in a directory, so some people will not be able to reach you by telephone. So what you have observed कि privacy is a controlled disclosure. The personal data it depends that personal data may not be shared or may be shared. Now, after disclosing something, a subject relinquishes much control to the receiver. That means now it depends on the receiver whether he would spread the information further or it would not spread. Which data are sensitive? It purely depends on the subject. Individuals, informal groups and formal organizations all have things they consider private. Privacy has a cost. If you choose not to give information, there are chances that your profit or your benefit may be limited. Now, there are certain computer related privacy problems. Privacy, there are 8 dimensions of privacy. Those are related to web. The first is information collection. Data are collected only with the knowledge and with the explicit consent. Information usage. So information is usually used for only specified purposes. For example, there may be a book which can be used for academic purpose, but it cannot be used for selling. Information retention. The data are retained for a certain period of time. Then comes information disclosure. Data are disclosed to only a set of authorized people. Information security. There should be an appropriate mechanism that is used to ensure the protection of data. Access control. All nodes of access to all forms of collected data are controlled. Monitoring. Logs are maintained showing all accesses to the data. There is one more point called policy changes. Less restrictive policies are never applied after the fact to already obtained data. There are certain privacy issues that have come because the computers are now widely used. The first is data collection. Usually data is stored on the disks. Disks on ordinary consumer PCs are in terms of gigabytes, and commercial storage may go up to terabytes. Supercomputer has online storage of petabyte and offline of also petabytes. Google store data are always in the petabytes. So we have many devices, massive amounts of data to fill those devices. Whereas physical space limited, storing massive amounts of printed data, electronic data take relatively less space. Usually we keep our data with us, we never throw away the data, and usually we move it to the slower secondary media or keep on buying more storage. The second privacy issue with computer is no informed consent. Usually we get a content from public or commercial sources and from some intentional data transfers. But there are certain data that is collected without announcements. The telephone companies record the date, time, duration, source and destination of each telephone call. ISPs track sites visited. ISPs usually track which are the sites those have been visited. Some sites keep the IP address of each visitor to the site. Now the user, those are not aware that the internet service providers are storing the data, so cannot be said to have given informed consent. Loss of control. It says that others may keep the data whatever we have given to them. So if you have bought something online, your name and address, payment of data, the items purchased through a credit card, your identity, that merchant can redistribute your data. Then comes the ownership of data. Before computers, customer data are always valuable. That includes mailing list and customer list. They are all companies' assets and they should be safeguarded. Now we want to talk about privacy principles and policies. So if we talk about United States interest in this privacy and computer database was started in 1970s. A committee was developed and privacy principles that were formed and that affected the US laws and regulations, and also the privacy legislation path was set. So first is a fair information policy. It says there are set of principles which were given by Willis Ware in 1973 of Rand Corporation. He was the advisor he was chairman of the committee to advise the Secretary of the United States Department of Human Services on privacy issue. So those principles include collection limitation. So whatever data is collected should be obtained lawfully and fairly. Data quality. Data should be relevant to the purpose. Its accuracy need to be maintained. The data should be complete and up to date. Purpose specification. So the purpose for which data is used should be identified, and data should be destroyed if they are no longer necessary. Security safeguards. So there should be some procedures to guard against the loss, corruption, destruction or misuse of data. Openness, it says it should be possible to acquire information about the collection, storage and use of personal data systems. Individual participation, the data subject normally has a right to access and to challenge data relating to oneself. Accountability, a data controller should be designated and accountable for complying with measures to give effect to the principles. Now talking about the other principles, the turn and wear also considered protecting the data themselves, recognizing that collection of data will be attractive targets for unauthorized access. So they also suggested 4 ways to protect the data: reduce exposure, reduce data sensitivity. But the question is how to reduce data sensitivity. They say by interchanging the data, either interchange the data items or introduce some errors. Anonymize the data by removing or modifying, identifying data items. Encrypt the data. So now we will check what is the US privacy law. So United States passed the laws protecting data collected and held by other organizations, but they are in piecemeal. Consumer credit is addressed in the Fair Credit Reporting Act, Healthcare Information in Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, it is called HIPAA, Financial Service Organization in the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, Children's Web Access in the Children's Online Privacy Act, COPA. So there are certain privacy policies, but they are defined under different heads. So there are certain privacy provisions of the law that became effective. They found the following in the policies posted after HIPAA. That says statements on data transfer were more explicit than before HIPAA. Consumers still had little control over the disclosure or dissemination of their data. Statements were longer and more complex, making them harder for consumers to understand. Even within the same industry branch, statements varied substantially, making it hard for the consumers to compare policies. Statements were unique to specific web pages, meaning they covered more precisely the content and function of a particular page. Sometimes what happens, the law is still overlapping. Saying that which law would require privacy protection of a university student's health center bills paid by credit card, because the laws have different protection and handling requirements. So it is necessary to determine which law applies to a single piece of data. Sometimes the privacy provisions of a law are a second purpose. When we talk about HIPAA, it was to ensure that people who left or were terminated from one job had health insurance to cover them until they got another job. Next, we want to talk about controls on US government website. These privacy policies are important because they define the concept in a particular setting and specify what should or will be done about it. There is a Federal Trade Commission which has a jurisdiction over websites, including those of the federal government. This FTC, Federal Trade Commission, determined that in order to obey the Privacy Act, government websites would have to address 5 privacy factors notice, choice, access, security, and enforcement. Notice means data collectors must disclose their information practices before collecting personal information from consumers. Choice says the consumer should be, or customers must be given a choice how their data should be collected and how whether they should be collected at all or not. Then access says consumers should be able to view and always going to consumer can always check out the accuracy and completeness of the data collected. Then comes security. The data collectors must take reasonable steps to ensure that information collected from consumers is accurate and secure from unauthorized use. Enforcement says a reliable mechanism must be in place to impose sanctions for non-compliance with these fair information practices. In 2002, the US Congress enacted the E-Government Act of 2002, requiring that federal government agencies post privacy policies on their website, and those policies must disclose the following things. They say the information that is to be collected, the reason the information is being collected, the intended use by the agency of the information, that is why agency is collecting the information and what is the purpose. They even need to say this information will be shared with whom, the notice or opportunities for consent that would be provided to individuals regarding what information is collected and how the information is shared, the way in which the information will be secured, the rights of individual under the Privacy Act and other laws relevant to the protection of the privacy of an individual. The two acts which we talk about, the Privacy Act and then the E-Government Act, they both apply to the websites. Data collected by other means such as filling up the forms and case by case or agency by agency base. So when the data was collected on the forms, the requirement reflected in the E-Government Act, it had to suggest what is the type of data, and they didn't want to find out what is the general notion of privacy. When e-government policy was defined, it usually was related to the website. So now we want to talk what are the controls on the commercial website. So mainly throughout the discussion you got it that the basic thing is the data collection process. The privacy outside the government is protected by law in some areas. Which are those areas? The areas include credit, banking, education and healthcare. But these are all for the E-Government Act. But if we talk about private companies, there are no counterpart of it. So in controls on commercial websites, the first it says no deceptive practices. So if a company is doing some deceptive practice, the Federal Trade Commission has an authority to prosecute those companies. That means the company is advertising something in a false way or misleading way. The FTC, that is Federal Trade Commission, can sue them. For that they have used the web privacy approach. Now the company is saying it will protect privacy in some way but does not do so, then the FTC considers that as a false advertisement and takes a legal action. What are the examples of this deceptive practices? There was a company called Cart Manager. It run the familiar web shopping cart software to collect items of an order. In that, the cart manager collected the purchaser's name and address. It also determined the shipping and payment details. So this software was running under the name of the well-known retail merchant's website to handle the order processing. Now this cart manager did sell the data to some other companies, though the parent company, which was the well-known retail merchants website, said in the privacy policy that they would not share the data. So FTC held that the relationship to cart manager was invisible to the user. So the policy from the online merchants applied also to the cart manager. Next, we want to talk about the non-US privacy principles. So in that we can talk about the European privacy directives. Those require the rights of privacy of individuals be maintained and the data about them be processed fairly and lawfully, collected for specified explicit legitimate purposes and not further processed in a way incompatible with other purposes. The information should be accurate and it should be kept up to date. It should be kept in a form that permits identification of the data subjects for no longer than is necessary for the purposes. There are certain more things also, special protections for sensitive data. That means those identified as sensitive data should be protected with even higher grades. Data transfer, it restricts authorized users of potential information from transferring that information to third parties. The next says independent oversight, that says entities that process personal data should not only be accountable but should also be subject to independent oversight. So now we will talk about anonymity and multiple identities. So for privacy preserving, what is important? It is important to guard the identity. Not every context that we use that requires to reveal our identity. So you all know the mask. If I am wearing somebody else's mask, my face would look like them. So in a digital world, some people may wear an electronic mask saying that I am Mr. X, though they are Mr. Y. So first point is anonymity. Some persons would like to do some things anonymously. For a real-time example, we know that if our heroes, those who are acting in movies, if they are traveling on the airport, they would like to do something anonymously. They don't want people to recognize them. So if they are traveling, they would like to avoid unwanted attention from the other passengers. Some people would like the anonymity of the web because it reduces the fears of discrimination. Anonymity may create problem. If a person is anonymous, how would he pay? So there should be a trusted third party can complete the sale and preserve the anonymity. But then you need to have a third party. This third party knows who you are. Next is multiple identities, linked or not. Most people already have multiple identities, saying that you may hold a bank account saying 99999, your motor vehicle number saying 4913. You may hold a credit card that has a different number. For this identity is related to your name. Each identity is related to your name, but in our case that name becomes irrelevant because now we want us to be identified by the bank account number or the driving license number or the credit card number. But if you change your name legally, but the name on the credit card is not changed, then your name could not be used as a key on which to link. Now take about address. Trying to use an address on which to link presents another risk. Maybe where you are residing right now, criminal might have lived in that house. So you need to protect your reputation from the previously occupied person. Then there is something called linking identities correctly. For what purpose? To break the anonymity so that it does not create the privacy risks. If your identities are linked incorrectly, it creates the serious risks. Next is pseudonymity. Pseudonymity says there are multiple identities, those are convenient. They may have a professional email account and a social email account. There are something called disposal identities, where you use an identity for some time and then you stop using it. When you sign up for something and you know your email address will be sold many times, you might get a new email address to use until the spam and other solicited email are oppressive. And then you discard the address. This type of users are called pseudonymity. Suppose we talk about Swiss bank account. It's an example of pseudonym. Each customer had only a number to access the account. Presumably anyone with that number could perform any transaction on the account. There are the government and privacy. So government also gathers and stores data on citizens, residents and visitors. So first is authentication. So authentication documents usually come from the government. The government has to regulate the businesses that use identification and authentication keys. The government may obtain those keys from others. So government may misuse data and violate privacy rights. So government plays a complex role in personal authentication. There are certain data access risks. These risks are organized when the government started to acquire data from other parties. There may be data errors, inaccurate linking, difference of form and content, purposely wrong data is provided. there are certain false positive data, mission creep, and poorly protected. What steps are to be taken to protect against privacy loss? So, data minimization. Only list data should be obtained to perform the task. Data anonymization, where possible, replace the identifying information with untraceable codes. Audit trail, maintain the record that who has accessed the data. Then security and controlled access, give the rights so that only the sensitive data is only accessed by the persons, those are legitimate to access. Training, ensure people accessing data understand what to protect and how to do so. Quality, consider what data has been collected, how they are stored, what is their age, and find out what is the usefulness of this data. Restricted usage, that says different from controlling access. Review all proposed uses of the data, determine if those are consistent with the purpose for which the data has been collected. Data left in place, so never leave the data in place with the original owner. Policy, establish a clear-cut policy on data privacy. And the last point which I want to discuss is identity theft. So it is not new to us that there are some credit card frauds where credit card numbers are stolen and people have taken amounts, large amounts from with the help of credit cards. In the most cases, these identity thefts become apparent in a month or two when fraudulent bills start coming in. Now what happens? Thief has taken away the identity, he has made the profit. Now what does he do? He drops this identity and he keeps on finding the new victim. So have relatively few unique keys that facilitates the identity theft. So there are certain keys, so thief, if he gets one key, then he is not able to get the second key, and those who are having two keys does not have a third key. So if key is associated with each data, then there would be a controlled access, and even if one key is compromised, the whole data is not given to the attacker. So to summarize this module, I started discussion about privacy. What are the issues? Those relate to the privacy. Then we saw how the US government has defined the laws and what points they have considered for defining a policy. Then we talked about the important terms, that is anonymity and pseudonymity. And then I ended up by summarizing what is the identity theft and how you can have your credit card or important document saved electronically. Thank you.